What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another video. The Power of the Force 2 line from 1995 to about 2000 has some really cool items. They're not exactly modern. They're not exactly vintage Kenner, and you guys seem to enjoy these price updates on the Power of the Force 2 line. It seems like those are consistently videos that you guys like. So I did put together another video. I've got a few graded items, a few prototypes, some mint and sealed box vehicles, and just some kind of other items that sold recently, autographs, things like that, just to keep you all updated on what's going on out there for the Power of the Force 2 line. The first one was probably one of my favorites. I've got one other one that I liked a little bit better than this, but this one is pretty awesome. This one was a made for the Mexico market Darth Vader with multi-language name pills, multi-language for the Power of the Force, as well as a sticker that has the Spanish language there. And you can also see it's got an Argentinian import sticker on it. And this is the square card instead of what we're used to in the US and in Canada and even over in the UK with the trilingual cards where it's cut out. So instead, these are square cards, and some of the Canadian cards also came that way as well. But I just thought this was a really cool item since it did have that Argentinian sticker on there, made for probably the South American market, Mexico, things like that. It's labeled as for the Mexican market, but it does have the Argentinian sticker on there. And that one sold for $75. I thought that was a pretty good deal. And this one had, I think, the medium-sized saber. It's not the super long saber. It's not the really short saber. But there was like a time there where some of these figures for Darth Vader had kind of like a medium-sized, longer-ish saber. So just another kind of cool foreign variant for these Power of the Force 2 figures. Argentinian sticker, $75 plus $15 shipping. Some autographs for those of you that are into those. The Power of the Force 2 line is perfect for taking these kind of items to conventions and to have them signed. And obviously Warwick Davis was the one signing this one. And this one is like a 2-pack with Princess Leia from Endor, along with Wicket, and it's signed by Warwick Davis. That one sold for $75. Those prices have seemed to come down a little bit for some of these secondary characters. But even like Kenny Baker, who was fairly prolific with his signing of these Power of the Force 2 items, here was a green card with the hollow foil sticker on the left-hand side, and that one sold for $80, so $80 for Kenny Baker's signature. Two different Lando Calrissian sold first, the red card with Billy D. Williams' signature. Pretty good condition on that one. That one was $89.99, best offer accepted on that one, plus $12 shipping. And then here, you know, what a lot of these stars do is that they go to conventions, and then they slap a sticker on these back in the day, where, it had this face. I see it sometimes for Boba Fett with Jeremy Bullock's face, and some, Peter Mayhew is another one where they stuck, a sticker on there, and they were kind of convention exclusives. So for this one, it was the Boston MegaFest from 2006, and you can see there's Billy D. Williams with his younger looking, image there, and then it was signed by Billy D. Williams. And usually they're numbered like a certain number of, 1 to 500, whatever it is. So these are a little bit more desirable because they were only exclusive to that specific convention. And that one sold for $90 plus $6 shipping versus just a standard red card that you could find at retail without that sticker that sold for $89.99, best offer accepted. So somewhere below that number, probably around $75 is my guess. Some vehicles, mint and seal box, that I wanted to cover. We got the Y-Wing fighter, pretty awesome looking display there. That one sold for $340. That seems a little high relative to some of the others I saw that sold at auction, which were kind of in that $170 to $240 range. But this one did sell apparently for $340. Here's the Bantha with the Tusken Raider on top. This is always a pretty desirable one, although the Bantha does look like a little bit like a miniature poodle, as we've talked about in past Power of the Force 2 market updates. But that's another one that was pretty desirable and kind of saw a renaissance, so to speak, after the Book of Boba Fett series on Disney Plus and his kind of, flashback scenes where he was being recovered, where he was recovering with the Tusken Raiders. That one sold over in Europe for 113 euros which is 121 US dollars plus another 20 euros shipping. Next up is the Imperial at Walker mint and seal box. The box looked to be in great shape. The AT-AT driver as well as the AT-AT commander are included inside this one, but that's got to be a pretty large box. That one sold at an auction for $188 US, and that's probably the way to play a lot of these Power of the Force 2 vehicles. They're not particularly rare. And just wait for one to come up at an auction. When I was kind of backtracking through recent sales, I found a number of these that sold at auction. So just be aware that if you collect these mint and seal box vehicles, just wait for an auction. Don't do a buy it now unless it's a really, really good deal. Here was another Walker that sold in a buy it now situation, and that kind of supports my argument. This was over in the UK. It sold for £225, which is about $280 US, versus this one in the US that sold for $188 US. So part of it might be geography. Maybe in the UK they don't get as many of these as we do here in the US, but at least for those of you in the US, don't do buy it nows at those inflated prices. Try to wait for an auction because they do come up very regularly based on the closed sales data I was able to kind of look up for the last 3 months on eBay. Next up was the Millennium Falcon. That one also sold at auction from the same seller, I believe. That one sold for $157.50. Pretty good deal, and probably the cheapest you're going to find for one of these mint and seal box Falcons. Obviously, there's a Legacy Collection, which goes for quite a bit more, and then obviously the Vintage Collection Smuggler's Run version, or the earlier Toys R Us exclusive for the Vintage Collection. Those go for quite a bit more money, $400 to $500 pretty easily. So if you want a mint and seal box Millennium Falcon, but you don't want to pay those Legacy Collection and Vintage Collection prices, then go for the Power of the Force 2 line, which you can get for a fraction of the cost, $157.50. Free shipping on that one as well. Next up here is another Y-Wing fighter. This one sold over in the UK for £120, which is $148 US. And then you compare it to this one that sold in the US for $340. So that, again, that kind of supports the argument that you got to be a little bit more patient and don't just buy it now for some of these inflated prices. You know, whereas this one sold in a buy it now for $148 versus $340. So again, it might be, you know, geography related and who got what in terms of these vehicles, but that's a pretty dramatic price difference when you compare those two. Some other mint on cards. This one was a short saber. No, I'm sorry. This is the long saber version of Darth Vader on the 8-back red card. And this was graded UKG 90% gold. 90, 90, 95 were the sub-scores on that one. So this is a fairly common figure. Obviously, the short saber inside the long tray is where it gets really expensive. Those are considered a little bit more desirable because the original figures had a much shorter saber, and then Hasbro decided to switch it up and put in a longer saber like you see here. And then for a short while, those short sabers were packed inside those longer trays. And so those are considered a little bit more desirable because they're less in number once they transitioned over. So they're considered transition trays. Short saber on a long tray. This one is kind of after that transition where the longer saber was on the longer tray. And so as a result, these are pretty readily available, and it sold for $85 US, which is 69 pounds in an auction. Only one bid on that one. Probably the holy grail in terms of the freeze frame action slice is the US card Weequay, and we've talked about this one at length in past market updates for the Power of the Force 2 line, but this one was not made in big numbers, and for a while there, even like right when these were kind of getting released at retail in the 1990s, these were very, very expensive, like $600, and they're slowly dropping in price as less and less collectors care about the Power of the Force 2 line. It just seems like in general these days, in 2023, most people don't care about the Power of the Force 2 line. They either care about the Vintage Collection or they care about the Vintage Kenner items. And so these are kind of left out in the wind. And this one sold for $130, which is quite a bit less than where they were going for even 2 years ago. These were more like $300 ungraded in really pristine condition like this one. Likewise, here's another one that sold that was graded. And here is, again, the US card, Power of the Force, Weequay, freeze frame, AFA 85, straight 85s for the sub-score. That one sold for $281.90. Now, again, remember, that's kind of the price that the ungraded examples were going for even a couple of years ago. Now you can get an AFA 85 with straight 85 sub-scores, silver level in terms of the AFA grading for $281.90. I sold my AFA 85 Plus for not much more than that. I think I sold it for $325, somewhere in that ballpark. So it's kind of in line with where this one sold for. It was an AFA 85 Plus versus the 85, but, you know, pretty similar sales price away from eBay versus what this one would sell for after you pay eBay sales taxes and things like that. Next up, another graded example. This was a CAS 85 Plus orange card Boba Fett. Boba Fett obviously has a lot of different variations for the Power of the Force 2 figure. This was just the standard figure with the circles on the hands. As you can see, he's got those circles on the outside of his hands. There are half circles. There are no circles. There are combinations thereof. There's missing emblems on the chest. There's the missing skull emblem on the shoulder. And all of those can factor into higher prices. But this is just the most common example. It was listed for $195. Best offer accepted. I forgot to look up what the best offer accepted was, but I would think it's a pretty steep discount relative to what the list price was, because this one is the most common one. Usually in an auction for the standard orange card Boba Fett with the circles on the hands, I probably wouldn't pay more than $125 to $150. That's just a very common figure and not hard to find at all. Next up was an AFA 90 freeze frame Boba Fett. This one's a little bit more desirable, a little bit more harder to find than the standard red card. And it really presents nicely because that freeze frame picture shows Boba Fett with the Bespin guards, and they're kind of like ushering Han Solo and Carbonite to the Slave One, like we saw in The Empire Strikes Back. So this one is kind of a second level in terms of desirability, even though most of the time they just had the circles on the hands. I think very rarely you might see the half circles on the hands, but it's not very common for the freeze frame action slide Boba Fett. But it was an AFA 90. 90 for the card. Blister got an 85. Figure got a 90 for a gold level 90 grade, 3-tier grading. That one sold down in Australia for 585 Australian dollars, which is 380 US dollars. I had an AF 890 for this, and I promise you I sold it for nowhere near 380 US dollars. So whoever bought that one from me, they got a really good deal relative to what this one sold for. Now we're going to dig into a few prototypes before we wrap things up. I thought this was probably my favorite of all the different items that we saw here. And these originated from a Kenner engineer, and they were artistic drawings of what the figures were going to look like. And so first you had Lack Zivrak, and I have a Lack Zivrak right next to me on my shelf over here, first shot prototype. And so I would love to have had this and had it recased with the figure, the prototype figure, along with these prototype drawings. It would have looked really cool. Probably not something I actually would have done, but it would have been really cool. So there's Lack Zivrak. He came with those really bulky blasters. Next up, it looks like, I don't know who this, Biggs Darklighter, who's another pretty common Power of the Force 2 character. I had that one signed on the card at one point. Next up, we had, it looks like this one says Hoth Rebel Soldier, but it's the Indoor Rebel Soldier, but they were going to pack it in with the Hoth Rebel Soldier rifle. So there it is. It says Star Wars Indoor Rebel Soldier up top, and then on the bottom it says figures are standard Hoth Rebel Soldier rifle. So even on these drawings, they were already planning how they could reuse the molds for a lot of the accessories. So I thought that was pretty cool. Next up was the Death Star Trooper. So, just the, Death Squad Commander, if you want to talk dirty to me. He's got that Death Squad Commander helmet. Next up was the, Ton Snord. And I don't know if that figure ever made it to retail. So I think this one didn't make it to retail. I don't remember that character ever appearing on a card, but maybe I'm wrong there. He's kind of an elephant-looking face, and he's got some kind of weird, crab claws that stick out. So that one to me is a little bit more questionable. That one may not have actually made it all the way to retail. Let's see. Next up, there was the Imperial Admiral Piet, and I've got a first shot prototype Admiral Piet in a little while here. And then finally was the Ugnaught 2-pack. So even on this artistic drawing, they were already planning to release the Ugnaught in a 2-pack just as it appeared on the Power of the Force 2 card. So anyway, I thought those drawings were really cool. It's not something you see very commonly. And then in the description, it says, I bought these on eBay 20 years ago. They are not original art, but were originally obtained from a former Kenner employee. I've never made copies of these, and I haven't seen anyone else with copies. So these are copies of the original drawing, but they probably were copies that were made by the Kenner engineer originally. So I would think if they were the original drawings, they would sell for quite a bit more money than what these sold for. But, you know, just looking at them, it seems like it's legit, right? Just how they describe it and everything. This seller had 2,000 sales, and it's 100% positive feedback. You probably have a pretty good feeling that these are legit copies of the drawings from that original Kenner engineer. So these sold up in Canada for 200 Canadian dollars, which is 145 US dollars. Now, if they were the original drawings, not copies, I would think it would be in the thousands of dollars for those. So maybe I'm wrong. I have no idea, but hard to price those kind of artistic kind of drawings when it's just not something I follow very regularly. But anyway, I just thought it was kind of a cool item. Here's some Power of the Force 2 actual prototype figures. The first one is an R2-D2 launching lightsaber. You can see how yellowed it is, but it's unpainted. That one sold for $142.40 in an auction. Here's an unpainted A New Hope Darth Vader prototype. So I don't think this is the one that appeared on like the single red cards. This was probably like a later 2-pack type of figure where it showed him battling Obi-Wan Kenobi. They made a couple of later figures like that. And so it's labeled 1998 Power of the Force 2. So again, it's probably one of those 2-packs that came out later in the Power of the Force 2 line. But that one sold for $147.27. And here is the TIE Fighter pilot, unpainted prototype with translucent plastic for the torso there, and as well as unpainted white plastic for the head. That one sold for $202.59, and he had brown arms and legs. So anytime you start getting these kind of more off-the-wall colors, it usually signifies an earlier prototype. So that was from 1996. And then finally, here is that Admiral Piet prototype that I alluded to earlier. This was from 1997, and this one was sold by Toy Curious, Barry C., who has probably the best power. Him and Matthew I and a few other guys out there, Scott C. or Scott S., they have the biggest and most beautiful Power of the Force 2 collections you've ever seen in your life. And sometimes they sell off their doubles, and that was the case with this one. This was an unpainted Admiral Piet. 250 pounds is what that sold for, which is 310 US dollars. So anyways, you know, considering that the Power of the Force 2 line oftentimes doesn't have a lot of interesting sales on eBay, I feel like with this batch over the last 3 months, there were some pretty cool sales that I wanted to cover in this video for you Power of the Force 2 fans. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll be back soon.